Welcome back to part two of our Cloud Adoption Framework five-part series. I'm excited to be back here with you all. I think we did the first part, which was really the Cloud Adoption Framework introductory session. We ran that through for an hour, talking a little bit about the adoption framework, the content, doing a show and tell around, and ideating on a self-service catalog. Showed you some of the places and the resources that you would leverage. Today we will, as we said earlier on, today we'll be kind of focusing on building out landing zones. We're going to spend a bit of time going through that. Don't forget that we've got part 3, 4, and 5 coming up. Part 3 looking at best practices to how we do management and operations. Part 4 really kind of focused around driving agility in your business with Azure. So think about DevOps and GitHub, and then ultimately, in part 5, we will look at kind of architecting those solutions. And so what are the specific patterns that we use and coding patterns and so on. So we're kind of systematically getting to the point where we'll actually, walk you through kind of all these decisions that need to be made before building out these apps. Before I begin, I'm really excited to have a partner in this particular session. So we've got Jeff. Jeff will be joining us today, walking through some of the assets around landing zones. Jeff, do you want to give a quick hire?
Hey, thanks, Wayne. I'm glad to be here with you today, talk a bit about landing zones and the Cloud Adoption Framework.
Fantastic. And Jeff has been one of the architects of some of the elements of the enterprise scale work that we're going to be talking about a little bit later on. So stick around. Jeff is super knowledgeable in this area. By way of kind of just, I want to make sure that we give you a sense of what to expect over the course of the next hour or so. We'll, talk about, building out that landing zone to support your business goals. I'm going to do a little bit of a recap around the adoption framework and show you where we fit in. I've got those, that analogy set of slides that we spoke about earlier on. I'll just kind of reorient everybody as to where we're at. We're going to talk about what is a landing zone, how do we think about landing zones, what do we cover within those landing zones. We want to talk a little bit about how do we think about governance in the context of Azure, critical aspect of cloud as it kind of sets the platform around kind of driving policies and getting us teed up to do things in a compliant, consistent way. And then ultimately, what are some of the tools that we'll put in place to kind of support the build out of our landing zone, tools to support governance within Azure, and we'll do a bit of a show and tell on that front as well. And so as we kind of move forward, remember the last time we spoke about these phases of livability and kind of building out your home and kind of establishing that platform. We spoke about what you need to do to kind of build that home, getting your plan established, and then starting to build your home. And then ultimately, how we can evolve and change over time. As we think about Azure and how this fits within Azure, we're actually at this place today where we're going to be talking all about that landing zone. So think about the analogy of your contractor doing your piping and your plumbing and kind of getting all your services connected in. That's really what we're going to be fleshing out today and making sure that we truly unpack what is needed and all the decisions that are needed that we need to make as we build this out. Just recapping some of the work that we did early up in terms of the adoption framework. Last time we spoke about the 3 different pillars of the framework, looking at kind of that business decision, the business part of it. What are the decisions that we need to make around building out that adoption plan, getting that backlog of work, understanding your organization, your teams, and the structure. Today, it's all about this ready and govern piece. So we'll talk about ready and govern. Landing zones are a key element of just establishing this platform. As we think about that backlog of work, we're going to want to have a place to put all this stuff. And there'll be multiple types of there's different types of landing zones that we may think of. We may think of these kind of, this Uber landing zone that lands for the platform, and we may have a hub and spoke based model. But you may also have smaller kind of tactical landing zones that we need to establish and stand up as we go, as we build out our environment. And so we're going to talk about some of the principles within this, thinking about that the architecture and the design of those landing zones, what is needed from a security perspective, connectivity, identity and RBAC, making sure that we got the right policies in place that when we stand these environments up and assets get put into these environments, we have consistency around that. And then as we think about governance, we've got a very rich governance model and methodology that we use within the adoption framework, which we'll walk you through later on as well. But that governance methodology really helps us kind of look at 5 key disciplines. Disciplines around cost management, disciplines around security and identity, disciplines around resources and how we manage and architect or kind of utilize these resources, making sure that we use them in a compliant way, that we have redundancy built into the environment, we have the right connectivity and routing of traffic, and then ultimately the last part and the last discipline of our governance methodology is all around that deployment acceleration. And so as we think about that notion of cloud and the principles of cloud, it's all about, think about the model that we want to apply. It's not just a place where we put stuff, but also, getting to a point where we can actually drive things through, a CI/CD pipeline, build out your DevOps practice, self-serve, like you saw in the first episode where we did that self-serve platform. We can request the assets and environments. They get provisioned and get created in our Azure environment, but it's all governed and operated in a very consistent, similar way. So that's the area that we're going to focus on today. A lot of depth that we'll cover off as we go through this. You'll hear kind of 2 terms that we'll refer to. One is kind of on the landing zone. We'll talk about landing zones in general, but more importantly, we're going to really start to unpack what the actual execution of that, which is what we call enterprise scale. And we've built out this enterprise scale architecture to really help customers have a consistent approach and design point for that particular landing zone. Jeff is going to walk us through, some of the technical architecture of how this comes together. But as we've built this, we really try to make sure that customers can think about how do we operationalize this in the right way. We have all the best practices across security, identity, networking, and so on, kind of the way that we think about our subscriptions and the management of those subscriptions aligned in the right way. And so we want to be able to build that out. I'm really excited by the work that we've got within the enterprise scale architecture, because we've got some really interesting work around kind of some of the design principles. We've got reference architectures that you can have a look at. There's an implementation guide that we're going to walk you through as well. Jeff and I are going to do this in a very kind of casual way where I'll show something. We'll probably throw the screen over to him so that he can then walk you through. And we're going to actually show you the kind of 3 different types of models that we've actually built today around enterprise scale. So from foundation to virtual WAN to kind of hub and spoke, we got these 3 different models today that are available. So, Jeff, you want to give us a little bit of a kind of walk through around the landing zone and how you think about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the way that I think about landing zone, right, is if we look at the platform for Azure, and whether we're migrating applications or looking at greenfield deployments, certainly brownfield deployments where we've already invested in deploying some resources into Azure, but now we're moving fast and quick, and we need to know, we need to address best practices. Like maybe we didn't have a real need for a lot of HA reliability or backup, or maybe we needed just certain network requirements met by the business when we first adopted the cloud. And so the way that we address that, right, is we say, okay, let's lay down a good foundation in the platform so as we address resources, we can scale out. And so the idea of enterprise scale here is that, we have this architecture that helps us meet the requirements of our applications, our infrastructure, any type of platform consumption of Azure. And at the same time, we're doing it in a way that allows us to scale up and to scale down without much rework and without any kind of cliff designs that are going to leave us with a ton of changing our architectural configuration for our core components and shared services, right? So, and like you mentioned, building your house. When you build your house, the developer is going to put some components together for the water, the electricity, is going to make some plans for the driveway, right? But if we think about it, enterprise scale is building out the development of the neighborhood, the community, the city, right? We have to plan for the utilities for what we're going to be building, and we do it in a modular way. And so what we're looking at here is an image of the landing zone subscription within Azure, and we see the requirements that we have here around management and monitoring, and typical shared services, you have core shared services in your management partition from a security standpoint, right? That you want to make sure that you have all of the requirements for your storage, your maybe control over the network. When we talk about security groups and availability on the network to reach other segments within the locations that are would be back in HQ in our main data center or in our main location branch, right? So all of these things come together to be a design for a landing zone, which is where we are going to locate our resources in a multi-subscription approach within Azure. So when we talk about landing zone from the principle of ensuring that every component that we are going to need to plug into has been done tactically, has been planned for, and we've got, it's a lot like logistics, right? We have requirements when you're moving. You have to plan, making sure that you have movers, right? You have to have a truck to put your boxes into, and if you're like me, you buy containers so that everything fits exactly in, like Tetris. And so that's the approach to landing zones and how we organize resources and requirements. And so enterprise scale, the approach that we took here in building a landing zone, we had to have some core principles, some core guidelines that would help us with, number one, staying true to our modular state, right, Wayne, and making sure that as we made design decisions architecturally, that they would be able to scale.
Yeah, I love the fact that you talk about this in terms of both those greenfield and brownfield type customers, because I think a lot of the times when I come across customers and work with them, they say, hey, we've already got something kind of going in Azure, but we started maybe many years ago and we've just naturally evolved, but we haven't got all the best practices. Can we take a look at revising and reviewing that? And so I think enterprise scale really lends itself well to both ends of the spectrum. Like, I'm just brand new, help me kind of get this thing stood up. Or I've actually been here for a while, but I feel like I have gaps and concerns around security. I haven't done all the right things in terms of building out that landing zone. Help me kind of do that, and I think this is where it really lends itself well to addressing both of those.
Yeah, and that's how we want to make sure, that's how we want to ensure our customers' enterprise scale landing zone architecture is aligned to the cloud adoption framework and the Azure roadmap. So as you're looking at the configurations that we're making considerations and recommendations for you to implement via our architecture, we have worked with engineering, we have worked with our customers to ensure that these recommendations that we're making align with our best practices for adoption, right? So we're building that we're building that knowledge base, and we're sharing that with our customers, and we're here listening to our customers too, with simplifying this architecture.
Yeah.
And as we look at, like, what are those core things that you have to keep in consideration when you talk about the development of an architecture for the cloud, you have to decide, how modular you can be, right? There has to be some load, like we talk about subscription quotas, right? We in many cases, subscriptions, we look and see, what are the amount of storage accounts we could have, or those kinds of things. It's a research that you'd have to do when you're, for an analogy would be civil engineering, and you're making sure the water flow that you have meets your requirements for the city. In the same way, we need to make sure that the amount of flow that we have for subscriptions can meet our customers' demand, right? So subscription democratization is this principle that states because it's not law, but it identifies a good principle practice is that subscription should be used as units of measurement. And so when we look at a subscription, it's a unit of management for operations, for identity and access control. It's a unit for management and monitoring. So we have 8 critical design areas that we look at that subscription and say, what are the network and topology connectivity requirements? What are the requirements for business continuity and disaster recovery within that subscription? And so the subscription is aligned to the business needs, as well as it's used as a scale unit, so that we can, number one, apply the appropriate permissions and scale out as needed. Number two, so that the resources that we're aligning in these subscriptions are identified with policies on top of them, and those policies can be inherited, right, for the configuration. So the second principle here is policy-driven governance. It means that we're putting guardrails in place for those subscriptions. So I don't end up with a subscription that is deployed without, for instance, Azure activity logs going into my log analytics dashboard so that I can actually, or workplace, so I can actually see the activities that are going on. Another example might be ensuring that all of the resources that are deployed have the proper diagnostic settings deployed for them at the get-go, right? So I can quickly add a subscription into my Azure tenant, and policy-driven governance facilitates making sure that that subscription receives the configuration that we'd want for a baseline.
Yeah, that's cool. And we're going to definitely show how we can do some of that in a minute. I wanted to kind of go back to the subscription democratization, because I get a lot of customers asking kind of how many subscriptions should I have, or where, what are the decision points that I should have around kind of subscriptions. And I know that internally at Microsoft, our guidance has changed over the years. We used to have kind of guidance that said the fewest number of subscriptions, and now we kind of like build it for what you need, right? Mm-hmm. Is kind of how we want to say to customers that take your Azure environment and build so that it reflects your business and where you have accountabilities and so on. Is that kind of the guidance that you continue to give to customers?
Absolutely, right. The idea is that the subscription, you shouldn't limit yourself to a single subscription other than outside of the business case. Just like in the cloud adoption framework, we start with what? The business, defining your strategy, making sure you have a plan for your digital estate. If your digital estate requires 2 subscriptions or 3 subscriptions, then that's what is required, right? So I think we base everything, all of our decisions, right, are based off of the business requirements that drive it. The idea here is not to scale for complexity's sake, but to scale for proper management's sake. And so, yeah, absolutely, we align the amount of subscriptions to the requirements for that customer, and we use these scale techniques in order to manage it and set our baseline for management with as small amount of engagement and time as possible, right, in that activity.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so we just got a few more, and I'll go through really quick. The single control and management plane. This is the concept, right, around understanding abstraction layers between the of the platform itself, right? So Azure has a unified experience. It has a unified control plane in the platform, Azure Resource Manager, and it has provisioning channels inside of it. And so we want to make sure that our policies are all driven around the single control plane. And by using that single control plane, we can ensure that our policy-driven guardrails, right, are always constituted, and that our scale units, which are subscriptions, will always receive those configurations. So single control and management plane is to use the Azure management plane itself as the sole responsibility of the maintaining our resources consistency, right? And then the application-centric archetype neutral is something I think as coming from an IT background, an IT pro background, more of a server administrator, Intel administrator, is something that has become the new way to look at the world, which is that I have a ton of platform as a service solutions. I have a ton of solutions that provide management. You think about the change and transition of business from on-prem Exchange servers to Office 365, right? And so this is making sure that you're not thinking about an application as being just some virtual machines, right? You're thinking about overall, what is the requirement of that application? Can we use past services in that model? So we're archetype neutral. We're not looking at SaaS or IaaS. We're thinking about just what does the application require. And in that, ultimately, this should provide a safe and secure foundation for all application types, whether it be SaaS or IaaS. If we've got the proper platform components and policies put in place, whether we're deploying a VM to act as a database to a front-end web service, or however we're building our applications, we can mix between these different archetypes, and just focus specifically on the application. And then the last is aligning the Azure native designs in our roadmap. So this is really about the platform services and capabilities that Azure has. We're using them as much as possible, whenever possible, because we have that single control plane, that single management plane, as well as where the architecture is aligned to the roadmap within the enterprise scale landing zone. So as much as possible, we focus on using our core services, and using them and the scale units that they provide within the service. So that's the 5 principles that are put together and inform the landing zone, the enterprise scale landing zone, that then has different critical design areas for each component of the architecture.
And each of these we can unpack in a huge amount of depth as well. I just want to make a comment on the application-centric and the archetype-neutral kind of point, is that I think a lot of times we talk about IaaS and PaaS and SaaS, and I think it would be amiss of us not to talk about this in the context of hybrid as well, right? And so as we think about these particular solutions, and we think about how we want to architect these, there's also obviously the notion around hybrid is critical, and something that we should keep in mind as we go through this, thinking about that application where things reside. Cool. So any other thoughts on this before we kind of step forward on the design principles?
No, I think this leads nicely to kind of taking a look at under the hood and talking a bit about what this looks like in practicality, and the architecture. We showed the landing zone architecture as an outline, right? And that's one component of enterprise scale, because the architecture gives you the design guide, right? It's the module type for scale. It's the recommended best practice. So the architecture is that example, is that picture. But then there's also the reference implementation, and that part is I think where we get into our resources and how we can enable a customer to get started really quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to jump in. I'm going to take you. We're going to walk through for the rest of this. I think you'll be happy to hear that we've kind of exhausted slides. So we didn't want to kind of overburden everybody with slides, but we wanted to really kind of show you stuff. So we're going to walk through some pieces in the adoption framework around enterprise scale. I just want to kind of orient you where that's at. I'm then going to hand over to Jeff to kind of walk you through an actual implementation of enterprise scale, and you can use that and show kind of the click-throughs. I'll then take it back. We'll walk through kind of Azure policy. I think there's a couple of things that we really wanted to kind of spend some time on in terms of from a product perspective. How do we use Azure policy? How can we use kind of Azure blueprints? And then also wanted to spend a bit of time on kind of cost management, because these are all pieces of, as we think about the landing zone and we think about what we're implementing and putting in place, we can now start to kind of manage and get insight into the operations of these environments as well. So firstly, as we kind of explained, as we showed last time, aka.ms/adopt will take you to the adoption framework. There's the whole section under ready, because we're kind of the landing zone pieces fit under the ready section. I've actually already navigated to here. We've got some links at the end, which we'll share with you, which bring you directly to this content. But as we go through, we've got everything that Jeff has kind of spoken through in terms of design principles and design guidelines has been documented out here. Let's take a bit of time to review. You see the principles and what Jeff has kind of walked through, looking at our different design areas, as well as things like we've got different reference architectures and how do we plan for these specific areas around identity, subscription, networking, and so on. The area that I absolutely love is, and this is where Jeff is going to kind of take over and show in his own environment, is we've actually built these different reference implementations and reference architectures, which we've got the code sitting in GitHub. So you got links directly into their code here, or even just going ahead and doing a direct deployment into Azure as well, based on the sample reference and the sample of enterprise scale. Jeff, do you want to just give a little bit of a kind of talk around what is the difference between each one of these different modules that have been built, from kind of foundation to virtual WAN to hub and spoke?
Yeah, so enterprise scale foundation, right, is the start of the enterprise mode of laying out your management group structure, your governance for your landing zone, and your network, right? So you think about three core things you have to have: identity, network, and a mode of governance for the subscriptions that you're going to be allocating. So the foundation is really meant to get you into as a first introduction into enterprise scale, and maybe there are some components you want to build out yourself and put some time into custom development. The enterprise scale virtual WAN and enterprise scale hub and spoke are implementations where we have the management group, plus we have some networking configurations. So we found in demand customers are looking in two ways at their landing zone. The first one is they're looking for they're looking for networking with very specific parameters around what they want to manage and what they don't want to manage about their network. And so with the virtual WAN implementation, we have used vWAN to facilitate and manage the managed network, software-defined network approach. And then with a hub and smoke model, we have customers who require much more control of their network. They may have requirements for using certain types of routing, and they may have more custom requirements around managing their architecture. And so, yeah, the key here, and you can see in these high-level architectures you're going through. In the first one, as you scroll down, this one is the vHub, and so in this connectivity subscription for this architecture, I think you can click on that and get a little bit bigger. In the in the E section there, that's called connectivity subscription, you'll see that we have a vHub, and at each landing zone that you deploy, that's located in F, it says landing zone subscriptions, would connect to that virtual hub. Think about the landing zone subscription as maybe you've deployed some Windows Virtual Desktop, or you've deployed one of your applications for your ERP. Those would connect back to your connectivity subscription, and it gives you that central place of management for your network security team and network configurations across, whether it be the corporate connection, the application connections, or online only, where there's no connectivity back to on premises. And so that's one architecture. And then the next one that you'll look at here is this one is going to be our hub spoke. And so very similar model. What we've done though is we've transitioned away from the vHub underneath the connectivity subscription, and we've gone with the hub spoke model implementation. With VNet peering in place, of course, between that landing zone and the connectivity subscription. So these are the two most common that we see customers looking to engage with. And if it's good with you, Wayne, I'll go ahead and share my screen, and we'll start looking at what it looks like to put some of these components in place.
Yeah, let's do it.
So let me know we're good here.
Alrighty, off you go.
All right, so yeah, so this is where we start, right? Is we look at our different deployments, and then we can go to the GitHub from here. And once we go into the GitHub, we'll see our reference implementations are included. Actually, because I clicked on Wingtip, it sent me directly to the Wingtip reference implementation. So we wanted to make these real, and so I'm going to go to the root of the enterprise scale GitHub repo here and just stop here for a moment, because you'll see under deploy reference implementation, that's the three that we have identified. So your foundations deployment of enterprise scale is the Wingtip reference implementation. Your deployment of virtual WAN is Contoso reference implementation, and then your deployment of AdventureWorks is your hub and spoke. So we've tried to use real company names, because as you'll see for some of these, if I click on Contoso, for example, I'm going to get a preview of the landing zone structure that will be put in place inside of my subscription when I deploy this. So we can see at the top level the tenant root group, and then I can see down to my connectivity management group and my subscription that will reside under that. And there's my vHub and vWAN implementation. So we can see the architecture that's going to be deployed, as well as we can actually see a Contoso architecture story. So if I look down below here, I can see an example of a company, right, and how their requirements across the 8 critical design areas are laid out here, and how they went through the process of gathering their requirements for their landing zone. So a lot of great content in each one of the reference implementations for enterprise scale. So go back to our root here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to deploy the AdventureWorks reference implementation into my subscription. And I've done a couple of things in my portal subscription in order to do this demonstration today. So I've just set up a tenant. So this is Contoso Enterprise Scale Demo tenant, and I've done 2 things. The first thing that I did is I added myself as a add myself as a tenant owner. And what that means is when I go into my Azure portal and I click on Active Directory and look at the properties of my Active Directory, you'll see down here that my access for management of Azure resources is turned on and set to yes. And what this does is it sets the scope of my account at the tenant. So for the tenant, Contoso Enterprise Scale Demo.onmicrosoft.com, I'm now the administrator. So I ran the first command was to set the permissions, and then I ran a second command here that's in our GitHub, and this basically grabs out credentials that can be used for my deployment today that I created specifically for synchronization to a GitHub action. So we'll come back to that in just a few minutes, because what I want to do now that I've got my credentials set in my portal is I want to just click on the deploy to Azure button here. And what will happen is I'll be redirected and logged in to my subscription or to my tenant. And now that I'm into my tenant, I'm just going to go ahead and double check, because one of the things that you'll notice is if you're like me, I've got a lot of tenants that I manage and I work with based upon different accounts. And so if you select any of these tenants, this interface in the GUI of the portal will still stay the same, and you can select the proper tenant. So just something to keep in mind if you are a multi-tenant manager. So now that I'm in here, I'm in my tenant, the first thing that I'm going to be asked is what is the region to which I want to deploy. I'm going to select East US for my deployment scope for my tenant, and that means my tenant level deployment is going to be for East US. Then I'm going to go to the next phase. Each one of these boxes at the top is a phase of our deployment, and I'm going to make decisions along the way about my configuration. The first thing is my top level management group prefix, and so this is going to be, for our example, I'm going to use Contoso PD.
Hey Jeff, and once you've done that, can you just click back on basics? I just want us to.
You got it.
One of the things that you've built in is obviously the ability to go and actually customize some of those templates as well, right? And so if folk wanted to not just use a standard, they wanted to go and create those customizations, they would be able to do that here.
Yeah, you can do that here, as well as you can pull it from the GitHub. And the reason why I created the token earlier was because I want to show you that GitHub process too, as well. So yeah, there's multiple ways you can take these templates and customize.
Brilliant.
For reuse, absolutely. So once I've got my region selected, a prefix is too long, to 5 letters, so we'll go with this. CoPD sounds like a good company name. So yeah, so now that I've got that in place, that'll be the name of my company, I move to the platform management, security, and governance section of the deployment. And in this section, I'm going to make decisions around deploying my log analytics workspace and the data configurations that I'd like to make. Now, I want to point out 2 things. If I select no on deploying log analytics, you'll see a lot of my, all of my options are removed. Log analytics is something we want to put in place from the get-go, and want to choose the amount of days that we want to keep our retention. This is a very common configuration by customers. I'm going to select 60 days and just set that there. But at this point, this is where you'd want to go ahead and turn on your log analytics, because like I said, when you deploy that subscription, you want the activity logs from the get-go, what's going on within that subscription, API calls, Azure CLI calls, ARM template deployments. You want all those things to go in so you've got full visibility. And then the other thing is I'm going to go ahead and select my management subscription. So this is if you look at the architecture, right, we have a management group that specifically is for a management account. It has special policies that are put in place for it. And so in my management subscription, I want to make sure I'm deploying each one of these, and I'm gonna turn each one of these configurations on. But the thing to notice here is, right, we said yes to log analytics, and now we have all these log analytics solutions. Whether we need to do change tracking or find the health of our solution, or go through, there's the activity log, insights from malware, service map, so we understand on the net from a networking perspective what applications are talking to what, which ports they're using, right? So I'm going to leave all of those services turned on, and I'm going to get to the next major section, which is around Security Center. Again, if I choose not to deploy Security Center, you see all those options go away. I'm going to leave those on because I want these. I'm planning on deploying some Kubernetes a little bit later, and obviously I'm going to use some core servers for my services as well. So I'm leaving that turned on. So I'm leaving everything turned on, and this gives me a good baseline of reporting for what's going on in my tenant, as well as my security baseline configurations across my services and diagnostics. So this is the management, security, and governance section. And once I'm done with that, I can actually make some configurations for my connectivity in the hub and spoke. So go ahead and say yes. Again, I could say no, get no network options. I'm going to say yes. I'm going to select the subscription I want to use for my connectivity. Got address space that's pre-populated there. I'm going to use, again, East US for my hub, and I'm going to just deploy everything that I would need here for my network. So I've got, you can customize the network space should you need to, not using any public IP addresses here. And I have an identity subscription as well. So I'm going to select my identity subscription. This would be where my domain controllers and IAM access would be. I'm going to go ahead and turn on some policies that are going to prevent RDP from the internet, as well as subnets. All have to be associated with a network security group, so connectivity is coming through my virtual network. And I've got full control over my VMs through making sure that they have backup in place inside of that identity subscription. And the last one here is my landing zone subscription. I could have multiple. I do. In fact, I have a subscription for WBD, one for AKS, and one for SAP. I'll go ahead and turn those on. I'm going to leave my subscriptions. I'm going to leave all these default settings for my VMs. These are policies to make sure that my Kubernetes service is enabled by Azure policy. We've got making sure privileged containers in Kubernetes clusters, right? We've got a number of policies. These are all implemented by Azure policy on the management group for my landing zone subscription. So I'm going to turn these configurations on. I'll hit review and create.
So Jeff, just on your landing zone configuration, you've chosen to kind of create subscriptions based on workload type. Those could quite easily be based on business unit as well, right? And so if an organization said, hey, we wanted to build our structure and we assigned subscriptions to business units, that could be an approach as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the key thing there is that the management group structure reside the same. It's because the management group structure, you know, they think about the top level of the management group is to apply those policies that are requirements from the business unit. So the subscription could align to a business unit, but ideally you'd want to, it can align to a business unit, but you want to make sure that your management group configuration at the top level can facilitate the business growth, right, across the subscriptions that are going to be underneath that management group. Does that make sense?
Completely, yeah, absolutely.
I can show it as well once we get this deployed.
And it's pretty flexible. So there's no, you can't get something wrong at this point, can you? I think let's make sure we get.
No, right. No, exactly. And as deployment goes, right, we're going to see services light up inside of our configuration. Now, while that's running, I want to show another portion of enterprise scale when it comes to infrastructure as code for those customers who have a vigorous process with infrastructure as code. You can actually set up enterprise scale to as a infrastructure as code pipeline, right? So we have an example of that as well. As I showed you earlier, I created a service principal within my subscription, and then what I did inside of my GitHub repo is I configured in the security settings for my GitHub repo. I went ahead and configured a secret that was my SPN, and what that does is that connects my GitHub repo that I made of enterprise scale to a GitHub action. And now inside of my GitHub actions that I've completed here, whenever I post a commit to my repo and make changes in my policies from a CI/CD perspective and infrastructure as code perspective, I'm going to be add those configurations we captured, and then they'll be published in each one of my commits to my Azure environment. So it's a great way to get started with infrastructure as code that we've provided as a model as well inside of our reference implementation.
Yeah, it's super cool. Every time I see this, I get more excited because it just gets easier and easier by the day, which is awesome.
Yeah, so let's take a look and see what's going on here, right? We've seen now our top level management group, COPD. I guess that maybe could be a RoboCop reference. I don't know how that got in there. So we look inside of that root management group of our Contoso PD, and we can see here's the management group structure for our sandbox account, our decommission. But look, here's our platform, and inside of platform, we've got our management, identity, and connectivity. And so one of the things we can see in our deployment is that we've got a number of a number of deployments happening for our management and for our connectivity subscription. So those configurations are going to get put in place as we start to look at what's happening here with our resource groups. Here we go. We'll start to see resources appear as the implementation is running. And now let's take a look at policy, because our management group structure is in place, our policies have been set up. Now we have some configuration, some our policies have been applied. We're seeing our connectivity subscription is non-compliant right now, and the reason for this is because we're going through deployment, right? So as the deployment is put in place, and we in a regular interval, right, we're going to start to see the services that we've deployed come into compliance from the deployments that are happening within those management and connectivity subscriptions. So for example, on the connectivity subscription, we have the VNet hub that's going to be deployed along with requirements for policies on the network security groups and the application security groups. And so as that deployment finishes, we're going to see those resources show up. We're going to see the log analytics solutions and the diagnostics from those things start to log into the management subscription. And then we're going to start to see the compliance state get updated from those resources. So we've got...
How long does this take to kind of go and build out?
From what we've got here, probably take another couple of minutes. You want to take a look at some of the policy points that you wanted to take a look at?
Yeah, cool. So let me so let me do that whilst that's busy going and being built out. I'll jump on back and kind of we'll walk through three things that I wanted to kind of show off here. One is just looking at policy, and I think Jeff, you've done a great job of showing how we can stand that up. Now we start kind of fast forwarding, and customers are now operating and working in this environment. You've now got your established policies in place on that landing zone. What's cool here is that we can actually now start to think a bit about how do we enforce policy. So one of the things that we find customers asking us about is, hey, how do I do things like tags in a consistent way, making sure that lands on all the assets that I have? And so we enforce that through policies. We also, customers may turn around and say things like, hey, I need to conform to NIST, and here on this particular landing zone or this particular set of subscriptions, how do I kind of land that? So if you look at things like we've actually built within the environment, we've got NIST initiatives that have been established. This one's kind of got almost 800 policies built in. Just to give a quick bit of a background around Azure policy, you will have either individual policies or you will have a collection of policies which you kind of put into an initiative. And We'll show you how this gets used both within Azure Policy, but also as we kind of transition into things like Azure Blueprints, show you how this all comes together as well. And so you can kind of take these particular policies, apply them to subscriptions, and go and drive that level of conformance across your environment. So I'll open this big one. It's pretty hefty. It's going to render these various policies. What we've done is on this NIST is 853R4. All these kind of policies are applied within here, and so assuming you land that across that particular subscription or landed at a management group level, every single asset underneath that environment is now going to pick up these sets of policies that you're going to go out and define. And so as you think about applying this policy-based approach to your landing zone, there's some inherent ones built in, which Jeff has shown you from enterprise scale. That gets you started. You may need to look at tightening things up down the line. There is, as I say, there's not CIS, it's not CSI, CIS. We've got some CIS policies in place. We've actually got our Azure we've got a benchmark set of policies as well for security, which is super powerful. And if you have a look at that, you're going to get this V2 on the Azure Security Benchmark, and we'll drop some links into the IM window as well that you can go and follow up at a later stage as well. But this is our stated best practice around how do we apply security across the board as well. And this aligns to CIS version 7.1. I believe the reference was as well within that. But policy, super powerful. Great thing is that you can go ahead and you can apply compliance. You can see how well your assets are. So Jeff already gave some sort of indication of that. This is an environment that I've got running today, and it shows kind of how well am I compliant against specific things. I've actually also gone ahead and applied this UK kind of NHS, and you can see I've got 1 out of 16 resources are compliant. Now, from a tagging perspective, I like to use tags. I think we showed in the previous session where we did that. Where we did the service catalog, where we apply these tags by code. You could do them through policy as well. We could say, hey, if I've got a subscription, we apply your set of tags to your subscription. You can inherit that, or you can inherit from a specific resource group, and we drive that in a very compliant, conformant way. The other piece that I would want to kind of just quickly show you is Azure Blueprints. Now, Azure Blueprints, think about this as a way of being able to kind of drive consistency across your subscriptions as well. So you can do this through code. You can call blueprints through kind of your CI/CD as well. So once you create a subscription, you can apply a blueprint through code. Think about the analogy is if you've got a car that is being built through a particular, through a factory line, it comes in on the left-hand side, comes out on the right-hand side, and it looks the same every single time because you've got a set policy or a set blueprint for that particular vehicle. Blueprints are exactly the same approach for subscriptions. And so as you go in and we think about creating a blueprint, we've actually got a bunch of blueprints that are already built in by default. And so you can actually, we can start with a blank, but if I wanted to start with the default one, I'm going to just take let me take kind of the Cloud Adoption Framework Foundation blueprint, and we'll use that as a starting point. I'm going to give this thing a foundation kind of BP, give it a name. I'm going to set a location, and I will literally just go and land it on my own subscription, which is the crux. And I'm going to go into kind of my next set where you can actually go and define a set of artifacts assigned within this particular blueprint. So subscription-based artifacts. You can see here what I'm doing is that on every single subscription, if I apply this blueprint, I'll have certain locations allowed. I'm going to deploy Network Watcher. I'm going to make sure that I have storage accounts. What's also cool is we can go and add things like build out specific resource groups by default. So you could have a blank subscription and then apply the blueprint. It'll create those resource groups. You will then go and apply these different ARM templates. You create one for your network, and in this instance, I've got nothing in this particular network. Let's go for a second. I'm going to, just humor me for a bit. We're going to kind of pull up a specific set. I've got a VNet with a kind of ARM template. What's cool is you can actually go into the Azure Quick Start and you can pull down a lot of this stuff already to kind of get you going. Here's your parameters that would be defined within it. Hit add, and I've now got within my particular blueprint, I've now got an ARM template to create that VNet with those two subs. Identity, going to assign identity services to specific and roles to specific subscriptions as well. And then kind of for your first application, whatever that might be. Now you might also turn around and say, hey, for every single application, I may want to do something like assign a budget. And so, you know, once again, just humor me here as we go in and assign. I've written up a piece of code to do a budget for a particular resource group. We can assign that, set that budget name at the time of assignment, set the value of it, and bingo, you know, if we go. So now we've got blueprints that for every single time I create a subscription with this particular blueprint, it's going to look and feel exactly the same, which is extremely, extremely powerful as you kind of continue to grow this out and you start to manage your environment and try and drive that consistency. Save it as a draft, publish that draft. We can then go and assign that draft to multiple subscriptions at a time. And if you change or you want to update it, you go and update your particular blueprint, reassign, and every single one of those subscriptions then pick up the new capabilities that you've built that you've built into that particular blueprint. Last thing that I will kind of show and walk through with you is, you know, cost management is a conversation that comes up time and time again. So as Jeff has, you know, kind of stood up the landing zone. Within this, we're then going to apply policies to say, hey, every single asset needs to be tagged and tagged with the right variables and metadata. We now want to make sure that we have things like cost center tags associated to it, and then we can use, you know, some of the built-in capabilities of ACM. And this might be another whole session that we run with, you know, that we can ask the team to kind of set up. But we can show you how to do cost analysis at scale. But essentially, you want to be able to kind of get visual of what's being spent within your organization based on, you can look at it by scope. Scopes are essentially those management groups that Jeff just stood up for you. And you can see, hey, I'm going to have my business unit. I've got central IT. In my instance, I've only got one specific subscription. It sits under this business unit. But I've also gone ahead and connected up an AWS account into ACM. And so I can kind of start to see how I can start to see my AWS costs coming through as well. So if I have to select this out and go and have a look at that view, I've kind of got this, you know, monster amount of about $2 a month that is coming that I'm spending on the AWS side. But I can start to see that visualization, and it will give me kind of projections as well. I can see the service names that are running. So really, really powerful capabilities built in to see what is going, you know, so you can start to get a handle on those costs. We love things like cost alerts that get thrown in, all really, really important as you start to think about the growth of your environment. You want to be alerted and notified. This ties in very well into kind of things like things called Azure Advisor. The Azure Advisor recommendations give you opportunity to optimize and evolve your environment. And we'll talk about that at a later stage as well. And then ultimately, as you think about budgets, you can go and establish budgets for specific scopes within your environment, right down into something kind of as, simple as hey, let's go in and look at this particular app service that I've got up and running here. I want to set a budget for that particular app service. And that is just it's a resource group that I have. And so I can go and set this budget, and I can get notified of a budget that's happening on that particular application. I can get notified, which I can then go and remediate and take action. I can either write code into it, set up a logic app, or some sort of action group that helps me kind of either publish this into maybe a service catalog or some other, a service database or some other notification system that allows me to go and respond to any anomalies that are happening within my environment. So a lot that we've shown you there from landing zones. Jeff, was there anything else that you wanted to kind of touch on your side before we transition over?
I think we're good. Deployment's complete. Our management group structure's in place.
Love it. I mean, whilst it looks really complex, I think you guys have done such a great job of simplifying this and being able to help customers walk through, to kind of get their environments up and going. I think we've shown you kind of how to build out the enterprise scale piece, have a look at it within the cloud adoption framework content. We've shown you some quick views around Azure policy, really, really powerful sets of technology, Azure blueprints to kind of keep your subscriptions and consistent and drive that consistency across your environment. A flash view of Azure cost management. We'll continue to look at these as we go down and start to run more around the operations side of our environments when we get into these upcoming sessions. A couple of key references that I really want you to kind of take a look at. You've got the Cloud Adoption Framework and a link at the top. We've got the generator, which continues to give us, patterns and that we can share up. We've spoken about a little bit about that earlier on in the first session. Have a look at the reference implementation for enterprise scale. Take a look at the adoption framework content on enterprise scale. And then lastly, if you want to get some more learning around it, we've got a full-blown enterprise scale learning path. I actually had that open here. So if you go into docs.microsoft.com/learn and go into kind of browse that and do a search on enterprise scale, there's a ton of great content and assets that have been stood up, so you can go and get some deeper learning on each of these. So how to create that enterprise scale architecture, some of the design principles, how do we think about networking, and so on and so forth. So the team have done an awesome job to continue to expand on, to give you the facility and the learning paths for this as well. So, ton of information that's been dropped in this session. Jeff, any parting thoughts? Anything that you would want folk to definitely think about as we step forward?
As you're adopting, brownfield or greenfield, enterprise scale landing zone is always there to help facilitate that scale. You saw it, one click to deploy to Azure.
I love it. Thank you, Jeff. You've been amazing. Always insightful, and looking forward to seeing you all in the upcoming sessions. Remember, we have, our part 3 is kind of thinking about operations. Part 4 will drive agility with DevOps. We gave you a little bit of an insight into that today with some of the stuff that Jeff's doing. And then part 5, really architecting those solutions to optimize your workloads and building and utilizing some of those upcoming patterns. Thanks all. Have a good one and speak to you soon.